The humid Virginia beach air clung to Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen's skin as she stepped through the heavy wooden doors of Murphy's Tavern. After 18 months of classified operations that had taken her from the mountains of Afghanistan to the coasts of Somalia, she craved nothing more than anonymity. The dimly lit bar offered exactly that. A place where she could blend into the shadows and nurse a beer without anyone knowing she commanded one of the Navy's most elite special operations units. Sarah had deliberately chosen civilian clothes for the evening: faded jeans, a simple black t-shirt, and worn sneakers. Her long black hair fell loose around her shoulders instead of the regulation bun she wore during duty hours. At 32, she had earned her position through pure grit and exceptional skill, becoming one of only a handful of women to lead a SEAL task force. Tonight, however, she wanted to forget about rank, responsibility, and the weight of command decisions that kept her awake most nights. The tavern buzzed with typical Friday night energy. Groups of young sailors from the nearby naval base crowded around high-top tables, their laughter mixing with the sounds of classic rock from the jukebox. Sarah found an empty stool at the far end of the bar, away from the main crowd, and ordered a Corona with lime. The bartender, a grizzled man in his 60s with Navy tattoos covering his forearms, served her drink without conversation. Exactly what she needed. 3 stools down from Sarah, a group of 4 young sailors were celebrating something with increasing enthusiasm. Their voices grew louder with each round, and Sarah could pick up fragments of their conversation. They were new recruits, fresh out of basic training, assigned to what they kept calling some hardcore special ops thing starting Monday morning. Their excitement was infectious, reminding Sarah of her own early days in the Navy when everything seemed like an adventure waiting to unfold. The youngest of the group, who couldn't have been more than 19, kept gesturing wildly as he told stories. His name tag read Martinez, and his enthusiasm for military life radiated from every word he spoke. Next to him sat Thompson, a tall, lanky kid from Alabama whose drawl became more pronounced with each beer. The third sailor, Jackson, seemed more reserved but equally excited about their upcoming assignment. The fourth, Rodriguez, appeared to be the unofficial leader of their small group, constantly checking his watch and reminding the others they had an early morning ahead. "I heard the commanding officer is supposed to be some kind of legend," Martinez said, his voice carrying down the bar, despite his attempts to whisper. "Word is, this person has more combat experience than half the Pentagon combined." Thompson leaned in closer to his friends. "My buddy from advanced training said whoever runs this unit is tougher than boot camp instructors and twice as demanding. Apparently, people either wash out in the first week or become killing machines." Sarah suppressed a smile as she sipped her beer. If only they knew their legendary commanding officer was sitting 3 feet away, trying to enjoy a quiet evening. She had indeed built a reputation for demanding excellence, but she preferred to think of it as preparing her people for situations where anything less than perfection could mean death. As the evening progressed, the young sailors' celebration grew more animated. They had moved on to shots of whiskey between beers, and their coordination was beginning to suffer accordingly. Sarah noticed Rodriguez attempting to maintain some semblance of control over his increasingly intoxicated friends, but his own speech was starting to slur slightly. The trouble began when Martinez decided to demonstrate what he claimed was a combat role he had learned in training. Standing up from his stool with theatrical flair, he announced his intention to show his friends proper tactical movement. What he actually demonstrated was how quickly alcohol could impair judgment and motor skills. Martinez's attempted combat role began well enough, but the combination of beer, whiskey, and tavern furniture created an entirely different outcome than he had planned. His foot caught the leg of Thompson's stool, sending both sailors stumbling. Thompson's full beer glass flew from his hand in a perfect arc, its contents sparkling in the dim bar light as they traveled through the air. Time seemed to slow as Sarah watched the inevitable trajectory of the golden liquid. She had developed lightning-fast reflexes during countless combat situations, but the confined space and her position at the bar left her with no escape route. The beer struck her squarely in the chest and face, soaking through her black t-shirt and dripping from her hair onto the floor. The entire section of the bar fell silent. The 4 sailors stood frozen, horror replacing their earlier joviality as they processed what had just happened. Other patrons turned to stare at the scene, some snickering quietly at the obvious military personnel who had clearly had too much to drink. Sarah calmly set down her bottle and used bar napkins to wipe beer from her face. Her expression remained neutral, but inside, She was calculating how this incident would affect the team dynamics she would need to establish starting Monday morning. These 4 sailors would be part of her unit, and their first impression of military bearing had just been demonstrated through alcohol-induced clumsiness. Martinez was the first to find his voice, stammering apologies while attempting to hand Sarah more napkins. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean. I was just trying to show them. I'm really, really sorry." Thompson, still swaying slightly from his own alcohol consumption, tried to help by offering his jacket to Sarah. "Miss, please let us pay for dry cleaning or whatever you need. We're really sorry about this whole mess." Rodriguez, displaying the leadership instincts that had made him the group's informal leader, stepped forward with more composure than his friends. "Ma'am, I sincerely apologize for my friend's behavior. We'll cover any expenses this has caused you. We're supposed to report for a special assignment Monday morning, and this kind of behavior doesn't represent who we really are." Jackson, meanwhile, was frantically trying to clean up the spilled beer from the floor and nearby stools, clearly mortified by the entire situation. Sarah continued dabbing at her soaked clothing while studying the 4 young faces before her. They looked genuinely remorseful, and their concern seemed authentic rather than simply fear of consequences. She recognized the mixture of embarrassment, alcohol-induced confusion, and military training that was warring within each of them. "Accidents happen," Sarah finally said, her voice calm but carrying an undertone that made all 4 sailors straighten instinctively. "Though I suspect your commanding officer might have some thoughts about alcohol consumption before reporting for duty." The mention of their commanding officer sent visible waves of panic across their faces. Rodriguez paled noticeably, while Martinez looked like he might be sick from more than just the alcohol. Thompson and Jackson exchanged worried glances, clearly imagining the consequences of starting their special assignment with disciplinary issues. "Please don't report this," Martinez pleaded, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. "We were just celebrating our assignment. We promise we're not usually like this. Our CO is supposed to be really strict, and if word gets back." Sarah allowed herself a small smile as she gathered her jacket from the back of her stool. "I think your commanding officer will be more interested in how you handle yourselves starting Monday than what happened tonight. But you might want to consider whether this is how you want to make first impressions." The 4 sailors nodded vigorously, their relief palpable at what they perceived as a reprieve from disaster. They offered again to pay for cleaning, to buy her drinks, to do whatever might help make amends for their friend's mishap. "Just focus on being ready for Monday," Sarah advised as she prepared to leave. "Special operations assignments don't offer second chances for poor preparation." As she walked toward the exit, Sarah could hear the 4 sailors discussing their close call in hushed, worried tones. Rodriguez was already organizing a plan to ensure everyone was sober and ready for their Monday morning report time. Martinez was promising never to drink again before important military events. Thompson and Jackson were speculating nervously about what their new commanding officer would be like. Sarah stepped back into the humid Virginia night, her beer-soaked clothes clinging uncomfortably to her skin. Monday morning would certainly be interesting. She wondered how long it would take her new team members to connect the woman they had accidentally drenched in a bar with Lieutenant Commander Chen, the officer who would be responsible for training them into an elite fighting unit. The weekend suddenly felt much shorter than it had an hour earlier. Monday morning arrived with the unforgiving precision of military routine. At 0500 hours sharp, the Naval Special Warfare Command facility hummed with activity, as personnel prepared for another week of intensive training and operations. The compound, surrounded by high-security fences and monitored by cameras at every angle, housed some of the military's most classified programs. Martinez, Thompson, Jackson, and Rodriguez had arrived 30 minutes early, their weekend anxiety having transformed into nervous determination. They stood in perfectly pressed uniforms outside Building C, the designated meeting point for their new assignment. The weekend had sobered them in more ways than one, and each man had spent considerable time reflecting on Friday night's embarrassing incident. "I still can't believe we're actually here," Thompson whispered, adjusting his uniform for the dozenth time. "Special Operations Command. My granddad always said this was where legends were made." Rodriguez checked his watch again, a habit that had intensified since Friday night. "Remember what we discussed. Professional bearing, attention to detail, and absolutely no mention of what happened at Murphy's. We start fresh here." Martinez nodded vigorously. still haunted by images of beer flying through the air. "I've been practicing military bearing in the mirror all weekend. That woman was right. First impressions matter, and we can't afford to mess this up." Jackson, who had remained relatively quiet since their tavern mishap, finally spoke up. "What do you think our CO will be like? I heard from guys in advanced training that special ops commanders are on a completely different level." Before anyone could respond, the heavy metal door of Building C opened with a pneumatic hiss. A stern-faced Master Chief Petty Officer emerged, his uniform crisp enough to cut glass and his expression suggesting zero tolerance for anything resembling weakness. "Special Operations Task Force candidates, fall in," Master Chief Williams barked, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "You have exactly 30 seconds to form a proper formation before I decide you're not worth the Navy's investment in special operations training." The 4 sailors, along with 8 other personnel they hadn't noticed arriving, quickly arranged themselves into military formation. Rodriguez naturally positioned himself in the front row, his leadership instincts kicking in despite his nervousness. Martinez, Thompson, and Jackson filled in behind him, their weekend practice with military bearing evident in their posture. Master Chief Williams paced in front of the formation, his experienced eyes evaluating each candidate with the intensity of a predator assessing prey. "Ladies and gentlemen, you are here because someone in the chain of command believes you might possess the potential to serve in naval special warfare. I am here to inform you that potential means absolutely nothing without execution." He stopped pacing and faced the group directly. "Your commanding officer for this training cycle has more combat experience than most of you have years on this planet. This officer has led successful operations in environments that would send regular military personnel running home to their mothers. You will show appropriate respect. You will follow orders without question. And you will perform at levels you previously believed impossible." Martinez felt his palms beginning to sweat inside his gloves. The Master Chief's description of their commanding officer matched everything they had heard through the rumor mill, but hearing it officially made the stakes feel impossibly high. "Your co has specifically requested that this training cycle emphasize real-world scenarios and practical applications," Williams continued. "This means you will be tested not just on your physical capabilities, but on your judgment, your leadership potential, and your ability to function under extreme stress." Thompson's mind wandered briefly to Friday night, wondering if their commanding officer would consider alcohol-induced mishaps in bars to be relevant to stress management and judgment evaluation. He quickly refocused as Master Chief Williams's voice rose slightly. "Furthermore," Williams announced, "your commanding officer believes that the best way to evaluate special operations candidates is through immediate immersion in challenging scenarios. Therefore, your training begins in exactly 3 minutes, when the CO arrives. I suggest you use that time to ensure you are mentally prepared for whatever comes next." The formation stood in absolute silence, each candidate lost in their own thoughts about what the next few hours might bring. Rodriguez found himself thinking about leadership responsibilities and whether he was truly ready for the demands of special operations. Jackson contemplated the physical challenges ahead, while Thompson worried about whether his Alabama upbringing had adequately prepared him for elite military service. Martinez, however, couldn't stop thinking about the woman in the bar. Something about her calm reaction to being drenched in beer had stuck with him throughout the weekend. The way she had handled their apologies, her comments about commanding officers and first impressions, it had all seemed oddly specific for a random civilian, enjoying a night out. At exactly 0530 hours, footsteps echoed from the hallway leading to Building C. The sound was crisp and purposeful, suggesting someone accustomed to military precision. Master Chief Williams straightened to attention, signaling the candidates to maintain perfect posture and focus. "Officer on deck," Williams announced as the footsteps grew closer. The formation snapped to even sharper attention, every candidate focused on the doorway where their commanding officer would appear. Martinez held his breath, Thompson's jaw clenched with determination. Jackson's eyes remained fixed straight ahead, and Rodriguez prepared himself to meet the legend who would shape their next several months. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen stepped through the doorway in full military uniform, her bearing unmistakably that of someone accustomed to command. Her hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, her uniform perfectly pressed, and her stride confident. She carried a folder containing personnel files and training schedules, but her attention was focused entirely on the formation of candidates before her. For a moment that felt like an eternity, Sarah's eyes swept across the formation, evaluating each face with professional interest. Then her gaze landed on the front row, where 4 familiar faces stood frozen in various stages of recognition and horror. Martinez felt his world tilting as his brain processed what he was seeing. The woman from Friday night, the woman he had accidentally drenched with beer while attempting to demonstrate combat techniques, was standing before them in the uniform of a lieutenant commander. His mouth went dry as the full implications hit him like a physical blow. Thompson's eyes widened to the point where they might have been visible from space. The casual bar patron who had calmly cleaned beer from her face while offering advice about commanding officers was, in fact, the commanding officer they had been nervously discussing all weekend. Jackson's carefully maintained military bearing wavered slightly as he recognized the same calm expression Sarah had worn while accepting their apologies. The woman who had suggested they focus on being ready for Monday morning had been evaluating them even then. Rodriguez felt a mixture of admiration and absolute terror as he realized the woman who had shown such composure during their embarrassing mishap was the legendary officer everyone whispered about with respect and fear. Sarah allowed the moment of recognition to sink in before addressing the formation. Her voice carried the same calm authority it had possessed Friday night, but now it was backed by visible rank and official command. "Good morning, candidates," she began, her tone professional but carrying just a hint of something that might have been amusement. "I am Lieutenant Commander Chen, and I will be your commanding officer for the next phase of your special operations training." She paused, allowing her words to settle over the formation like a heavy blanket. Several candidates shifted slightly, but the 4 sailors from Friday night remained absolutely motionless, as if movement might somehow make the situation worse. "Over the next several weeks, you will be tested in ways designed to reveal not just your physical capabilities, but your character under pressure," Sarah continued. "You will face scenarios that require quick thinking, adaptability, and the kind of judgment that separates special operations personnel from regular military service." Martinez was fairly certain he was going to pass out. The irony of their Friday night conversation about judgment and first impressions was not lost on him, and he suspected it wasn't lost on Lieutenant Commander Chen either. "Some of you may already be wondering whether previous encounters or first impressions will influence your evaluation during this training," Sarah said, and Martinez swore she was looking directly at their section of the formation. "I want to assure you that every candidate will be evaluated solely on their performance during official training activities." The relief that washed over the 4 sailors was almost visible, but Sarah wasn't finished. "However," she continued, and that single word sent their anxiety levels skyrocketing again, "I will be paying particular attention to how each of you handles unexpected situations, responds to stress, and demonstrates the kind of character necessary for special operations work." She began walking along the formation, stopping briefly in front of each candidate. When she reached Rodriguez, Thompson, Jackson, and Martinez, she paused slightly longer, her expression giving nothing away about her thoughts. "Special operations work requires personnel who can maintain composure in any situation," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the formation. "Whether you're in a combat zone, a diplomatic setting, or even a civilian establishment, your actions reflect on your unit, your service, and your country." Martinez was absolutely certain she was talking directly to them, but her professional demeanor made it impossible to tell if she was angry, amused, or simply making a general point about military bearing. "Your training officially begins now," Sarah announced, returning to her position in front of the formation. "Master Chief Williams will escort you to the physical training area, where you will begin with a baseline fitness evaluation. Following that, you will participate in team-building exercises designed to assess your ability to work effectively with your fellow candidates." She consulted her folder briefly before continuing. "This afternoon, you will begin tactical training scenarios. I want to see how you respond to pressure, how you solve problems, and whether you possess the judgment necessary for special operations work." As Master Chief Williams prepared to dismiss the formation, Sarah added one final comment that sent chills down 4 particular spines. "I should mention that part of your evaluation will include scenarios designed to test your decision-making in social situations that might compromise operational security or reflect poorly on military personnel. These scenarios have been designed based on real-world situations that special operations personnel have encountered." The formation was dismissed, and candidates began filing toward the physical training facility. Martinez, Thompson, Jackson, and Rodriguez found themselves walking together, each lost in their own thoughts about the monumental coincidence that had just been revealed. "Did you know?" Thompson whispered to his friends, his Alabama drawl barely audible. "How could I have known?" Martinez replied, his voice tight with stress. "She looked like any other person having a beer on Friday night." Rodriguez, ever the leader, attempted to maintain perspective. "She said we'd be evaluated on our training performance. We just need to prove ourselves through our work here." Jackson nodded agreement, but couldn't shake the feeling that their commanding officer now knew more about their character and judgment than any of them were comfortable with. Behind them, Lieutenant Commander Chen watched the four sailors with professional interest. Friday night had indeed provided her with valuable insights into their personalities, their group dynamics, and their ability to handle unexpected situations. Now she would see how they performed when they knew they were being evaluated. The first 3 weeks of training passed like a blur of physical challenges, tactical exercises, and mental stress tests that pushed every candidate to their absolute limits. Lieutenant Commander Chen's training program proved to be everything the rumors had suggested, and more. She demanded excellence in every aspect, from weapons proficiency to underwater navigation, from hand-to-hand combat to complex problem-solving under extreme pressure. Martinez had thrown himself into training with the intensity of someone trying to prove his worth after a humiliating first impression. His dedication to physical fitness became legendary among the candidates, often staying after official training hours to perfect techniques that others had mastered more quickly. The embarrassment of Friday night had transformed into fuel for improvement. Thompson surprised everyone, including himself, with his natural aptitude for tactical planning. His methodical Alabama mindset, which some had initially seen as slow, proved invaluable when analyzing complex scenarios that required careful consideration of multiple variables. Lieutenant Commander Chen had noticed his analytical skills and began assigning him leadership roles in planning exercises. Jackson demonstrated exceptional composure under pressure, particularly during underwater training exercises that left other candidates struggling with panic and disorientation. His quiet demeanor masked an inner toughness that emerged whenever the stakes were highest. He had become the candidate others looked to for calm guidance during the most stressful moments. Rodriguez's natural leadership abilities had flourished under Lieutenant Commander Chen's demanding standards. She had tested his decision-making through increasingly complex scenarios, and he had consistently demonstrated the kind of judgment and character necessary for special operations work. His ability to maintain team cohesion while achieving mission objectives had earned respect from both instructors and fellow candidates. However, the elephant in the room, their Friday night encounter with their commanding officer, had never been directly addressed. Lieutenant Commander Chen maintained strict professionalism during all training activities, evaluating each candidate solely on their performance without any apparent reference to previous incidents. Yet the four sailors couldn't shake the feeling that she was observing them with particular interest, looking for signs of character and judgment that went beyond standard training metrics. The turning point came during the 4th week, when Lieutenant Commander Chen announced a special training exercise that would test candidates' ability to maintain operational security and appropriate military bearing in civilian environments. The exercise, she explained, would involve scenarios where special operations personnel might need to blend into civilian populations while maintaining their mission, focus, and military standards. In special operations, you will often find yourselves in situations where your actions in civilian settings can compromise missions, endanger teammates, or damage military reputation, she explained to the assembled candidates. This exercise will test your judgment in environments where the stakes might not be immediately obvious, but the consequences of poor decisions can be severe. The candidates were divided into teams and given various scenarios to navigate. Some involved maintaining cover identities while gathering intelligence in public spaces. Others required them to handle confrontational situations with civilians without revealing their military training or mission parameters. Each scenario was designed to test different aspects of judgment, composure, and decision-making under pressure. Martinez's team was assigned a scenario involving a social gathering where they needed to blend in while observing specific individuals without drawing attention to themselves. The setting was a restaurant where they needed to maintain their cover while dealing with potentially intoxicated civilians who might become confrontational or create disturbances. Thompson's group faced a scenario where they needed to extract information from reluctant sources in a bar setting while maintaining their civilian personas and avoiding any actions that might compromise their identities or reflect poorly on military personnel. Jackson and Rodriguez were assigned to separate teams but given similar challenges involving social situations, where alcohol was present, and where maintaining professional standards while appearing to be ordinary civilians required careful, balance, and excellent judgment. As each team prepared for their scenarios, Lieutenant Commander Chen observed their planning processes with particular attention to how they discussed potential challenges and developed strategies for maintaining appropriate behavior, regardless of circumstances. During the exercise debriefings, she asked pointed questions about decision-making processes, contingency planning for unexpected situations, and strategies for maintaining military standards, even when not in uniform or official duty status. Special operations personnel represent their service and their country every moment of every day, she reminded them. Your actions in a bar on Friday night are just as important as your actions in a combat zone on Monday morning. The enemies of our country don't distinguish between on-duty and off-duty behavior when they evaluate our character and professionalism. Martinez felt his face burning as Lieutenant Commander Chen's words seemed to speak directly to their Friday night incident. He realized she was using their real-world example to illustrate training points without explicitly calling them out. Following the completion of all scenarios, Lieutenant Commander Chen called for individual evaluations with each candidate. When Martinez's turn arrived, he entered her office with the same nervousness he had felt on Monday morning, wondering if their tavern encounter would finally be addressed directly. Martinez, Lieutenant Commander Chen began, consulting his training file. Your physical fitness scores have been exceptional, and your dedication to improvement has been noted by all instructors. However, I want to discuss your decision-making processes under stress. She leaned back in her chair, studying him with the same calm expression she had worn while cleaning beer from her face. Tell me about a time when you made a decision that you later realized might have been influenced by alcohol or peer pressure, and how you would handle a similar situation differently. Martinez took a deep breath, realizing this was his opportunity to address the incident honestly. Ma'am, 3 weeks ago I made several poor decisions in a civilian setting that demonstrated lack of judgment and consideration for others. I was influenced by alcohol and the desire to impress my friends, which led to behavior that was inappropriate for military personnel, even when off-duty. Lieutenant Commander Chen nodded, encouraging him to continue. If faced with a similar situation again, I would maintain awareness of how my actions reflect on my service and my teammates. Martinez continued. I would consider the potential consequences of my behavior, not just for myself but for anyone who might be affected by my poor judgment. Most importantly, I would remember that being a special operations candidate means accepting responsibility for maintaining professional standards regardless of the environment or circumstances. And what did you learn from the consequences of those poor decisions? She asked. Martinez met her eyes directly. I learned that first impressions matter, that actions have consequences beyond what we initially see, and that maintaining military bearing isn't just about following rules. It's about respecting others and representing something larger than ourselves. Similar conversations took place with Thompson, Jackson, and Rodriguez. Each candidate demonstrated that they had learned valuable lessons from their Friday night mishap, and each showed growth in their understanding of what it meant to serve in special operations. When the individual evaluations concluded, Lieutenant Commander Chen called the 4 sailors together for a group discussion. They entered her office with uncertainty, still unsure how their commanding officer truly viewed their tavern incident and its impact on their training evaluation. Gentlemen, she began, I want to address something that I believe has been weighing on your minds for the past month. The 4 sailors straightened in their chairs, preparing for whatever consequences they had been dreading since Monday morning. 3 weeks ago, you encountered me in a civilian setting where you demonstrated poor judgment, lack of awareness, and behavior that reflected poorly on military personnel, she continued. However, you also demonstrated genuine remorse, willingness to accept responsibility, and concern for how your actions affected others. She paused, allowing her words to settle before continuing. More importantly, you have spent the last month proving that people can learn from their mistakes and use those experiences to become better service members. Your dedication to training, your improved judgment in stress situations, and your obvious commitment to meeting higher standards have been noted by every instructor in this program. Martinez felt a mixture of relief and continued anxiety as he waited to hear their fate. Special operations work requires personnel who can learn from mistakes, adapt to unexpected situations, and maintain high standards under any circumstances. Lieutenant Commander Chen explained. Your performance over the past month has demonstrated all of these qualities. She stood and moved to her filing cabinet, retrieving 4 folders that she placed on her desk. These are your advancement recommendations for the next phase of Special Operations training, she announced. All 4 of you have earned the right to continue in this program based solely on your training performance and demonstrated character growth. The relief that washed over the 4 sailors was immediately tempered by Lieutenant Commander Chen's next words. However, I want you to understand something clearly. Your success in this program moving forward will depend on your continued commitment to the standards you have demonstrated here. Special operations personnel are held to higher standards because the nature of our work demands it. There are no second chances in combat situations, and there are no do-overs when your actions reflect on your teammates, your service, or your country. Rodriguez spoke for the group. Ma'am, we understand the responsibility that comes with special operations training, and we're committed to meeting those standards every day, not just during official training hours. Lieutenant Commander Chen nodded approvingly. I believe you are. Your performance has shown me that you understand the difference between making mistakes and learning from them, versus making the same mistakes repeatedly. That distinction will serve you well in special operations work. She handed each sailor his advancement folder. Your new training assignments begin next Monday. You'll be working with advanced tactical teams on real-world scenario training that will prepare you for deployment with special operations units. The standards will be higher, the expectations greater, and the margin for error smaller. As the 4 sailors prepared to leave her office, Lieutenant Commander Chen offered one final observation. Gentlemen, leadership in special operations often means learning to turn mistakes into teaching moments, failures into motivation for improvement, and embarrassing moments into opportunities for growth. You have demonstrated all of these qualities during your time here. Martinez turned back as they reached the door. Ma'am, thank you for judging us on who we proved ourselves to be, not just on who we were during our worst moment. Lieutenant Commander Chen smiled. The first genuine smile any of them had seen from her since their training began. That's exactly what special operations leadership requires, Martinez. The ability to see potential in people and help them reach it, even when they start from less than ideal circumstances. 3 months later, all 4 sailors graduated from the Advanced Special Operations Training Program with commendations for excellence in leadership, tactical proficiency, and military bearing. They would go on to serve with distinction in various special operations units around the world. Years later, when they found themselves in leadership positions training new candidates, each of them would remember the lesson Lieutenant Commander Chen had taught them. That true professional growth comes from learning to maintain the highest standards in every situation, whether in a combat zone or a civilian bar, whether in uniform or civilian clothes, whether being observed by commanding officers or thinking no one important is watching. The Friday night incident that had started with embarrassment and anxiety had ultimately become the foundation for understanding what it truly meant to serve in special operations, where character, judgment, and personal responsibility matter every moment of every day.